The red meat sector is a crucial source of our country's economic growth. It supports rural industry and boosts our export performance. So when America hit us with a 15% tariff for beef this year, it hurt a lot.
Since the tariffs came on 1 August, we probably paid around $300 million worth of tariff costs. That's not pocket change, that is significant dollars.
So an unexpected tariff announcement out of America this week has been called
a big win for New Zealand Inc.
Yes, President Donald Trump has cut the 15% tariff for our beef exports, and a wide range of other food exports gone, removed immediately.
President Trump's doing a U-turn. He is backtracking. He's reversing the additional 15% tariff on food products, fruit, veggies, spices, coffee, and for us, most importantly, beef.
This was very much a surprise, a pleasant surprise, somewhat in keeping with the way President Trump tends to roll out his trade policies.
But why? And why now?
As Americans lined up at the butchers to pay more and more and more for New Zealand beef, basically they got angry. And they got angry to the point Trump had to acquiesce. So the tariffs fall in places like New Zealand Inc. cash in. It is good, basically, to be on the right side of the argument.
The tariffs coming off are worth annually about $2.2 billion, but our Trade Minister is only cautiously rolling out the celebration mat.
The changing nature of decisions out of the White House still makes it very uncertain for New Zealand exporters, and there are many other exporters that are still facing the 15% tariff, which is challenging for them.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and today on The Detail, what Trump's tariff reversal means for New Zealand and America. Can it reshape the economies? Do risks still loom? And is it a sign that tariffs are on the way out?
I do think there's a lot of people out there who are looking at some of these changes and going, surely at some point we just get rid of tariffs and we go back to normal. And I really don't think that's the case.
That's economist Brad Olson.
I'd love it. I'd love us to go back to, a position where tariffs weren't normal and expected. But in all of my conversations with those overseas, it's a pretty constant view that tariffs are here to stay in some way, shape or form. You'd hope that maybe over time they get less intense, but there is a real focus domestically in the US as the world's largest economy that they are still feeling the hit or feeling a perceived hit from challenges overseas in terms of import levels and wanting to do a lot more domestically. That means that any future administration is going to find it tough to unwind that full level of tariffs because immediately everyone's going to pillar them and say, well, you're looking after other countries and you're not looking out for number one in the US. So there are various legal mechanisms that might well play out. There's other legal mechanisms that are going to, in my mind, keep tariffs in place, and it does become a real challenging environment for how do we continue to evolve trade in New Zealand out across the world. We just need to have as many partners as possible, but we've got to sort of maintain that friendship and engagement across the board so that we're sort of not focused on any one country too much. We've got as many options out there as we can.
Today, I also chat to Kate Ackland, the chair of Beef and Lamb New Zealand and the New Zealand Meat Board.
Look, the US market is so important. It's our biggest market. It's our most valuable market. 46% by value of our beef goes into the US. I think what this will do is just provide a bit of surety to those processors or, the meat companies who are sending product out there and, developing those relationships and investing in that market.
More from Kate in a moment, but first, why did Donald Trump remove the tariffs, which were introduced in April at 10%, then upped to 15% in August? I asked Brad if it was an economic or political incentive that drove this week's unexpected decision.
Look, there's elements of both, but let's be clear, it seems very much a political decision based around the cost of living challenges that US consumers have been facing. You've got a number of products that have been increasing, sometimes because of the tariffs, sometimes not, but being exacerbated often by those tariff costs because, of course, tariffs are paid by the country where the stuff comes in, and so that means that US consumers have been having to pay these higher tariffs for some of the different options, and a lot of it is foodstuffs. It was items items that US consumers were noticing going up and up and up in price. The president was starting to cop a little bit of flack for adding that pressure into US households. You saw in September US inflation hit 3% for the first time since the start of 2025. So that uneasiness around the cost of living pressures that, of course, have been a big political challenge for many across the world the last couple of years, they were starting to bite a bit more intensely. They were a bit more, being slated back to the president's policies. So this did seem a political decision to remove some of those more direct pressures around the likes of, beef and coffee, because they're just so in your face as a consumer rather than any economic reason or incentive.
I want to talk about the benefits in a moment, but first, Trump, has he got a bit of egg on his face over this? Because the tariffs have been a big thing for him.
This is part of what hurt Republicans in the election. James Carville used to say it's the economy, stupid, and right now the Post says you can update that to it's affordability, stupid. And that is why Trump is in Biden land, according to many experts.
When we first had the tariffs come through and announced that, there was pretty strong views that there were going to be challenges around cost of living. And in fact, for some of these items in particular, and that was really brushed off by the administration. And even at the moment, there isn't a particularly, strong level of recognition or owning what's happened in terms of what the tariffs have done to households in the US. Instead, you've had the president at some point saying, look, we've just taken a pragmatic approach and we're just sort of changing around what's happening to the tariffs, and sometimes they're items that actually we don't do a whole lot of ourselves domestically. That's a little bit hard to understand and stomach, given that, if you look at beef, the US does do a lot of beef, but they've just got very low beef stocks. So you've got low supply, you've got still high demand. That's, of course, been causing some pricing pressures. But I don't think you've seen a lot of ownership from the US administration over this. More importantly, you have had a real sort of flip-flop on what's been coming through when you look at the justification for the tariffs originally. The idea originally was to try and get a bit more trade balance, and the US didn't want to be sort of beholden to importing all the stuff from overseas, whereas now it seems like, well, clearly there was a reason that the US was importing it, because they needed these foodstuffs, they needed it at a reasonable cost, and they weren't able to do that domestically. So there has been a real adjustment there, but no real recognition of why the adjustment had to come through.
How surprised were you by the announcement?
In a sense, I wasn't surprised by the announcement. I thought it might have to happen at some point. I was surprised that it happened so quickly and with sort of, in a sense, so little fanfare. Potentially that little fanfare was more because the administration didn't want to make a huge connection to the rollback in tariffs. And does come after, if you sort of look and talk to various trade experts, there's been elements of this underlying the last couple of months where the US has been making small changes to tariffs over time for different countries or different products, but without sort of a lot of pomp and fear, trying to sort of get it in under the radar, given all of that focus on tariffs and how important they were. So it was surprising, I think, to see it come through this side of Christmas. I really thought that the US might try and keep the tariffs for a year at least before really trying to make adjustments, but clearly the pressure was coming through, and you are getting these real concerns. I mean, you look at the likes of ground beef, which is up, I think, something like 13% year on year in the US. That really does start to hit not only your households directly, but it starts to eat into the bottom line of McDonald's and other large corporations. They are and do have a bit more of the ear of the president and various officials in the administration. So those concerns around cost pressures would have been coming quick and fast into the White House, you'd expect.
So let's talk, Brad, immediate benefits for our New Zealand exporters. What can they expect, from the removal of these tariffs?
Yeah, so I think about 30% of New Zealand's exports by value are sort of now decoupled or sort of have had those lower tariffs coming through, which is, of course, encouraging. It's a couple $100 million, I think, off the top of my head, that won't have to be paid in tariffs for a number of New Zealand products. Beef, of course, the biggest winner there. I think we sent around about 2.5 billion of beef to the US over the last wee while. The challenge is, of course, that it's still a little bit depends on exactly what product you're sending. So beef in a better spot, but if you're sending lamb or venison, for example, those are still covered by the tariffs. The likes of wine, another area that's still a bit more exposed. So some benefits in some areas, but certainly not, I think, as widespread as people might have hoped or expected. A bit also on the likes of the fruit front, a bit of kiwi fruit and some of the, apples and pears and that we send through. I expect that there'll be juices and other products that we make from fruit that are now coming off. So that's encouraging. But really the beef is the biggest one by quite a margin. doing, but it's the others that aren't doing or won't be getting any relief immediately. So about 70% of New Zealand's exports to the US still covered by those reciprocal-ish, apparently 15% tariffs. For a lot of operators, there'll be some that are quietly and not so quietly stoked with this decision. There's a lot of others who are going, why not me? Why didn't I get a look in? What's wrong with my product? And more importantly, how do I make sure I'm on the next list? And I think that one's difficult because certainly, although we've got some pretty strong views about the tariffs and our products and similar here in New Zealand, that's not the sort of message that's going to get through to the White House. There's a lot of other countries are much bigger, much stronger, much more louder than us that will be trying to protest their views as well.
Oh, I bet. But is there any chance? I mean, this is so unexpected, this latest tariff. We can't rule out that they could be lifted for other products.
Oh, certainly not. I completely agree. There's a chance. I think the challenge is what's the next sort of reason that you'd start to see that come through? What sort of pressures might emerge? And in particular, where is that sort of balance between what pressures households are feeling in the US, which is going to influence the president, but also weighing or balancing that up against local domestic producers in the US who will also be a little bit keen to keep the tariffs on. If you're a US beef producer, for example, you're not as worried at the moment about New Zealand beef coming in because no one can get enough beef and prices are rising anyway. If you're a US wine producer, though, you might be quite happy at the moment that other wines from overseas, New Zealand, Australia, Europe, are now relatively more expensive, and so you sort of do have a little bit more of a wedge there. And so I suspect for a lot of those items, there's also going to be a counter view from US domestic suppliers to the president going, hey, I'd quite like if you could keep the tariffs there. It's not causing a huge challenge to households, and more importantly, we're doing better here domestically. That sort of story does run very, very well in the US. Having spent most of October there myself, it was interesting talking to a lot of people about the tariffs and the, expectations around what they were doing to local businesses. And although there were various views around the traps, and a lot of people said, look, if I was in that role, implement the tariffs like they have been done. Also, in the same breath, a lot of people are saying, but I sort of understand and agree with the underlying reason for the tariffs. So there is still a real focus, I think, in the United States around a bit more self-sufficiency, trying to sort of do things and drive things themselves. The tariffs still economically are a poor move, but there is a real level of, understanding from local producers and a real keenness to try and keep some of those protections in place.
Well, then on that note, how worried are you that Trump could just roll back this removal and put these tariffs back on?
Oh, it'd take nothing at all to see a complete change. That's the widest worry I think we've got when it comes to tariffs and the general trade position at the moment globally. It's not that necessarily that trade conditions are bad, like they're clearly worse than where they were, say, a year ago when we didn't have tariffs. It's the uncertainty. If I'm a business, what on earth do I do with my supply chain, with thinking about where I produce stuff, with my cost efficiencies? I just don't know on any given day what's about to come out, what rules might be in place, what agreements that might have previously come through that will just be sort of thrown out the back. And that's the, I think, most challenging one, particularly around investment. You think of a New Zealand producer who's sitting there, previously might have been investing in a certain type of kit. Tariffs came through, they had to pull back a bit. Now the tariffs have come off maybe for their product. All of a sudden they're keen again. But do they make a $5 million commitment into a new factory or a new bit of kit or something only for the tariffs in 3 weeks' time to be changed around again? It's not the sort of business environment where I would probably be investing a lot of money. I know a lot of businesses are still keen to do stuff in the future, but they're just so uncertain about making those commitments. You could well have some pretty stranded investments at points. So that difficulty really does persist. And I think tariffs to a degree are here to stay. That is going to be challenging for exporters across the world, including in New Zealand. But the variety of changes, the uncertainty that creates is a real boondoggle in terms of what you do next as a business and an exporter.
In very simple terms, who stands to gain and who stands to lose in both countries?
In general, US consumers are still going to get hit with tariffs because they haven't all gone away, but they might have a little bit more relief on some of those key products, the likes of beef and coffee. The likes of the president maybe loses out ever so slightly because he's had to change his view a little bit more, but realistically, probably not a lot of people are focusing too much attention on that because that focus on the cost of living is so intense. Here in New Zealand, really it is an overall win for the country because we don't have to have that same pressure on some of our exports. We're not having to see that additional 15% levy paid. It brings us back in line with our other trading partners like Australia and similar. The losers, in a sense, sense are more those that didn't get the relief. They haven't seen those changes in tariffs and are still sort of, having to protest their case. But I think you're even starting to see parallels here in New Zealand where those pressures on some important goods are in focus. Last couple of months, we've spent a lot of time in New Zealand talking about butter. Mince has now become the new butter. We're talking a lot more about that as a commodity now, $23 a kilo. So that's not a tariff direct impact, but the president has, of course, been able to say, well, look, I'm making a difference there and taking off some pressure. Of course, he added it in the first place.
The White House also under pressure on the economy and the issue of affordability, as costs remain high, especially on grocery items, despite President Trump's insistence that prices are coming down. The Trump administration announced it was rolling back tariffs on some food products, including coffee, bananas, and beef. One of the administration's top economic officials insisted tariffs do not lead to higher prices, but says this rollback will lead to lower prices.
Do we expect the prices on those goods now to go down?
Right. Well, the prices for those goods weren't necessarily going up just because of tariffs, and so the prices will go down. Well, the prices will go down, of course, but
because the tariffs have been taken off.
Right. Well, because the supply of the goods into the U.S. is going to increase.
From a consumer point of view, you're getting a bit more relief. From an exporter point of view, here in New Zealand, you've got some more opportunity and room to manoeuvre and a better sort of competitive environment with other exporters. But if you're not currently on the list, if you're not in focus, then again, you're sort of watching, waiting, worrying and going, do I ever get that relief, or am I still going to be stuck behind the 8 ball for a bit longer?
Kate Ackland is on the winning and losing side as chair of Beef and Lamb New Zealand. Tariffs are off for beef, but not lamb. We talk about whether the lamb tariff will budge in a moment, but first, her reaction to the beef tariff removal.
Well, I think like most people, we were quite surprised, but obviously really pleased. I mean, this is great news for farmers and for the whole red meat industry.
How good news? I mean, how significant is this decision for your industry in real terms?
Well, since the tariffs came on in April, there's been an additional tariff cost of $122 million. And at the 15% rate, we were forecasting it would be around a $300 million cost. So that's really significant, given that previously we were on a tariff of 0.3%.
And for farm gate prices, will farmers actually see a lift?
It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, there is a global shortage of red meat protein, and demand is at levels up we haven't seen in my generations. So prices are already very strong. I think this was driven by consumer pricing in the US. So obviously the consumers absorbed some of that tariff cost, and some of it we in New Zealand as farmers paid. So there may be a lift, but it may not be significant.
Just, have you spoken to any farmers? What are they saying? What's the feel on the ground?
Oh, look, everyone's really chuffed by it. I think, though, it's sort of come out of the blue. And, like the tariffs came on out of the blue, or, overnight. This is something that's happened very suddenly as well. So a bit of uncertainty about all these sort of swings backwards and forth. But, everyone's really happy. We're taking it. It's a really positive time in the red meat sector.
What about lamb? Because the tariffs are still on that, I understand. What impact is that having, and the likelihood of the tariff coming off that?
I can't see the tariff coming off lamb in the short term. Lamb goes into the US in a really different way. So rather than being essentially a hamburger ingredient like our lean beef trim is, the lamb we send in goes into very high-end restaurants. So probably that sort of, consumers feeling it in the back pocket isn't quite the same. We're really lucky, though, with lamb. We have really good diversified market access into a bunch of different markets. So we've seen a big swing of lamb sales back into the UK, into Europe, and China's starting to recover as well. So having that good market diversification has really helped the lamb side.
Back to the beef, and will the tariff removal open doors to expanding volume in the US?
I think the biggest limiting factor on expanding volumes is going to be supply. So, there is limited supply in this country and around the world. So, the challenge to our meat companies is to be putting the product in the markets that will pay the most for it. We've got a really good quota access into the US that we haven't filled for a few years. Maybe we'll come close to filling that, but I'm not sure if we'll see a significant increase in volumes.
I'm not sure how this works, Kate, to be honest, but are there specific beef products or cuts that will benefit perhaps more than others?
Well, predominantly into the US, we're sending lean beef trim, and they're mixing that with their fattier US product and making, those perfect hamburgers. So since the tariffs came on in April, we've seen a real decline in volumes, and a lot of that product has actually been going into the UK. I think what we'll see happen is some of that product that was getting diverted into the UK going back into the US. So maybe, the declines we've seen in the last 6 months, they may start to reverse slightly.
And obviously we are celebrating. What about American producers? Do you know how they're feeling? Are you expecting any sort of pushback from them?
No, look, US producers, we have a really good relationship with them and with sort of counterpart farmer organisations over there, because they recognise that our lean beef product adds value to their offcuts. We're not trying to compete with them on that sort of premium grain-fed steak market that they have over there. We're actually adding value to their products. So they acknowledge that they need us. They can't produce enough product themselves over there. So not anticipating any major pushback from those US producers.
Which is good. The one thing that worries, it seems, a lot of people is, obviously we've touched on it, Trump's history of sudden trade shifts, one might say. How confident are you that these tariffs won't be reinstated?
Look, it's really difficult to say, but that uncertainty, it's been a real challenge. Probably more for our exporters and meat companies than for farmers. On farm, we're just, especially at this time of year, we're flat out just getting on with farming. But it does make it really difficult for our exporters and our meat companies.
So, tariffs have gone. Do you expect American consumers to see lower prices, or will retailers absorb the gains?
Well, I think it was very clear that that was President Trump's intent, was to provide a bit of relief in consumers' back pockets. So hopefully that follows through. I mean, we've always been of the view and very clear that tariffs are inflationary, and that's come to play out.
Just so we're clear, paint us a picture from when the 10% then the 15% tariffs were put in. How damaging has this been for our very important red meat sector?
So since the tariffs came on in April, we've seen a steady decline in volumes that have gone to the US, but interestingly, the value has held up. The biggest challenge, I think, came for us in August when New Zealand got put up to a 15% reciprocal tariff, but many of our sort of, call them competitors, but other countries that trade with the US, like Australia and Argentina, who are also sending beef in there, they got left at 10%. So that was probably the most difficult part for New Zealand. Having this completely gone now is great. It's going to be very interesting to see what it does to other markets and other, the dynamics in other markets. If you think about China, a lot of products that, say, the Brazilians would have sent to the US, but were facing incredibly high tariffs, got redirected into China, which, that was challenging for us there. So there's going to be a bit of a rebalancing, I suppose, of trade flows, and it's just going to be interesting to watch over the next few months to see how that settles.
What does this moment mean for the future of New Zealand's red meat sector, Kate?
Well, look, the future of New Zealand's red meat sector is incredibly strong. There is a global shortage of red meat protein and demand like we've never seen it. Free and open trade is absolutely the key to food security and keeping high quality protein on people's plates. So, we've strongly advocated always for free and open trade. It's really great to see such a sudden reversal of the tariff regime on some specific products, but obviously we'll be pushing for that to be broadened.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Brad Olsen and Kate Ackland. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by William Saunders. I'm Amanda Gillies. Matua.